Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the final night of Audubon Vermont's Alumni Week. Tonight, we are celebrating birds and birders and what that means. Audubon Vermont, this whole week, has been celebrating the young professionals who come through our office and have been coming through our office for years. We have a youth leadership program, which Ray Browningcant is leading. And that program connects youth to internships, young adults, to positions at our summer camps. We coordinate with other organizations. So we really just wanted to take this week to highlight all of the work that they help us do and the work that they get done at Audubon. And so tonight's panel is the final night of that. I also want to give a special shout out to Kira Fagan, who is also here tonight. She is our education intern and has been with us in this last kind of funky year of being in a pandemic while trying to work from home and being an intern. But I really appreciate her time and her energy. She put this panel together tonight. So thank you, Kira, for your time. A couple of housekeeping things. Our panelists are going to have themselves muted, but they're each going to have a time to respond to questions and answer one another. We have the chat going because we are in a funny space where we can't see you, but we know you're out there. So please use the chat to talk with one another. You can also pose a question to the panelists directly. So just make sure that when you're in the chat, if that is something that you want to do, that's what you select. Also in the chat, we have just dropped a little, we'd love to hear where you are. And we have started considering what land we're on and whose land we are on. So if you could take a moment and tell us where you are joining us from. There's also a link where you can discover what indigenous land you are on, and you can type that into the chat as well. So we will give you a second to do that and come into the space. Welcome. All right, a couple of other things. So next week, Audubon Vermont has a panel put on by our policy interns called Tough Conversations. It is something that we do every semester. That again is totally led by our interns. So the next Tough Conversations is coming up on Tuesday, the 13th. So please tune in for that. And then with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in. We've got some great questions and I can't wait to hear from our guests. So we are just going to start with a little bit of introductions. I would love for you to have this time and the space to introduce yourselves and your pronouns and your work. So Jordan and Gabriel from Bird Names for Birds, how about you guys start first, please?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jordan Rutter, and my pronouns are she, her. And I, along with Gabriel, are on unceded Piscataway land, also known as the Greater Washington, D.C. area. We have a puppy named Eider, who is 3 months old, so apologies for any noise in the background. But you can introduce yourself, and then we'll share about bird names.
I'm Gabriel Foley. I use he, him pronouns. And basically, I love birds.
So to share a little bit more about Bird Names for Birds, it's something that Gabriel and I are really trying to help raise the issue regarding eponymous names. So eponymous names are human names put on something, in this case, birds. And they're kind of easy to identify because in your field guide or on your app, if you see the apostrophe S in the first word, that's an eponymous name. So examples include things like Cooper's hawk or Wilson's warbler. And so we're trying to say that both the actual honorific aspect of this, of the human dimensions aspect of these names is needs to be reviewed. These names need to be removed. But also we need to think about the structure and system that led to us having birds be named after people and how those names are perpetuated. It's not an inclusive practice. It's mostly been white people, specifically white men, that have created these names, put these names on the birds, and then continue to use them and make decisions. And we're saying that all birds are incredible and deserve to be incredible on their own, and for humans to celebrate them.
Thank you so much, Jordan and Gabriel. Freya, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Freya McGregor. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Birdability Coordinator and Occupational Therapist. Birdability, I'm on Muskogee Creek lands in Alabama. Tuscaloosa, Alabama is where I am. Birdability is a brand new nonprofit that was founded by Virginia Rose, who is a wheelchair user and birder, and wanted to share the joys of birding with people with mobility challenges. But as an occupational therapist, when I came along, I was like, hey, but there's all other kinds of birders who have different kinds of disabilities or other health concerns that may also have similar or completely different sometimes, but accessibility challenges, both in the physical environment, like on trails or in bird blinds, but also the cultural and social environment. If other birders aren't welcoming and inclusive, then it doesn't really matter if the trail is perfect, people may not feel comfortable going birding there. So I'm really passionate that birding is for everybody, and everybody deserves to get the joys of birding if they want to. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Freya. Sam, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Desjarney. I am currently in Portland, Oregon on Cowlitz and Multnomah land. And I am the creator and host of the Always Be Birding podcast. It is super new. It's only been out for like 7 months, but I'm having a blast doing it. And basically my whole thing is equity in birding for BIPOC human beings, and the kind of representation aspect of it mixed with historical aspect of it, and kind of also recently been getting into kind of how birding can be a racist kind of act in and of itself, that kind of tags into kind of what Bird Names for Birds is kind of doing as well, that kind of mix into that. So yeah, my goal is just to get everybody and anybody out there birding and acknowledge the fact that BIPOC people have been doing it for a long time and are also still doing it. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you everyone for those introductions. And in my nervous excitement here, I don't think I introduced myself, so I'm gonna do that. Hi everyone, my name is Debbie Archer. I use she, her pronouns. I am the education manager at Audubon Vermont. And Audubon Vermont is a state office of the National Audubon Society. Okay, so I am excited to hear more from each of you. And I wanna start something that in listening to Sam's podcast and Freya, there was a webinar from Audubon about birdability that I heard into, and Jordan and Gabriel on your website. What really becomes very clear to me is that birding brings you all joy, and that is a joy that you want to make sure people can experience and just take part in without the other stuff, the other like gross, icky stuff. So I was wondering if you all could tell us what got you into birds and birding. So we can maybe go backwards this time. Sam, would you mind going first?
Yeah, so I've only been birding for like 3 years, but I had been doing wildlife rehab for years. And so I was working for a small nonprofit conservation organization out here doing wildlife rehab. And then I was training birds for education programming, which is like the best thing ever. Had a blast doing it. And during that time period is when I kind of learned that birding was like a thing. I didn't grow up knowing that it was at all like just a thing that people do. I didn't know that. So it was news to me. And I went out with my coworkers who, when you work for a birding or like a bird conservation organization, like people just naturally kind of fall into it. I went out, and one of the first times that we went out together, we saw a bald eagle like booking it across this lake after a mallard, and I was sold after that. I was like, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen. And so I had always like, I'm an animal person, like point blank period, and working in wildlife rehab did get me close and start loving birds, but unwell birds is different than birds out in the wild who are healthy and able to do the things that they are supposed to do. And so getting to go out there with the type of people that I went out with, who are younger people, I had a blast. Like we just had so much fun doing it. And then I just kept doing it, and now here I am. So I have a whole podcast where I talk about birds. Like, I don't know. I definitely wasn't expecting that. So that, yeah, just work, and then just like going with the right people and seeing how fun it could be. And then just continuing to have fun while I do it. So.
That sounds like an amazing eagle encounter. I heard you share that story on your podcast, and it's like, wow, I want to see that. Freya, what got you into birds and birding?
So kind of opposite experience to Sam. I grew up with birder parents back home in Australia, but so I was birding as a little kid, but then not necessarily out of choice. When you're a little kid, you just go with your parents because what else are you supposed to do? And then as a teenager, I was like not a birder, but I just knew the local birds around me because I just did. Like my parents always pointed them out, so I just sort of knew them. And then I fell in love with an American and moved to Central Texas. And suddenly there were all these random birds like woodpeckers. Like, what? We don't have them in Australia. Hummingbirds? Like, is that legit? And I didn't know what they were called, and that was really odd because I was living in a place. I wasn't just passing through traveling, and I didn't have names for these birds. And so the transformation happened really fast. Like, I think I bought my Sibley's field guide within 2 months, and the binoculars followed pretty quickly after that. So my mum was just like, well, it's about time. So there was no particular spark bird. It just kind of happened all of a sudden, and I'm really glad. So I think a funny lesson I tell lots of parents want to get their kids interested in birds, and I hear them say like, I'm trying really hard, my kid's just not interested. And I'm like, hey, you never know, those seeds you're planting now, like I am proof that sometimes they bloom later on. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Jordan and Gabriel, you can each please take your time and tell us what got you into birds and birding.
So I've been birding for as long as I can remember. And I always had kind of this parallel path in life of both birding as the hobby, but also finding out that you could have a career with birds. And so I was very young when I was like, I'm going to be an ornithologist. And so I had the science and research and academic route as well. And so I've kind of always found myself kind of in the middle of a Venn diagram, basically, of trying to balance both this passion of birds, but also like wanting to do a job that I love doing for birds. And so the thing that I found out as I was doing all of these jobs and helping lead bird walks or in the community and stuff is I really like talking about birds too. I'm not a podcaster like Sam. I would never even touch that because Sam does such a great job, and I just love the science communication aspect of it. And so I think that that's really where I find my niche basically in the community, is trying to help folks kind of connect to nature through birds. Just making sure that I'm doing my part to, again, be inclusive in that way. But again, birds are everything basically for my life. They're my hobby, my work. We named our puppy Eider, which is a type of bird. So really everything is birds for me. So
I got into birding. I remember looking at, there was this old Audubon field guide and it had the photos in the front. And I spent a lot of time looking through this. And if you asked me what my spark bird was, it would probably be like the first bird, the cattle egret that was in that book. I remember, I didn't know that birding was a thing. I kind of identified as Sam a little bit in that way. Like, I didn't know that people went out and looked at birds. I knew that ornithology was a thing, but yeah, I went to college and then realized that, wow, there are people who like really like birds. And I think I could kind of get into this. And it's been, I think you could say, downhill from there. I've really gotten kind of carried away with birds, I guess. Certainly if you ask my family. And I particularly enjoy the behavior aspect of birds. I coordinate a breeding bird atlas, and this is one of the best kinds, in my opinion, of like birding is this idea of atlasing, where you're trying to figure out how likely a bird is to be breeding in a location. Because instead of just going out and trying to identify species, you're out there trying, like, you're focusing on one individual and you're trying to decide how likely it is to be breeding or not. And it's just like this idea of slow birding. It's awesome. I love it. So.
Thank you all so much for sharing those stories. I'm wondering if this has happened to you all. Like, in my life, now that I am like the bird person in my group of friends, my family, like all of the birthday presents, the birthday cards, everything has birds on it, is bird themed. My mom will text me blurry pictures like that she took of a bird that I wouldn't have even been able to see with my binoculars, but she took it with her cell phone and she's like, what is it? Do you all have that experience? Are you the bird people?
Gabriel and I have 60 years of experience between us in the bird community. I feel like we have 60 years worth of bird stuff to go with that. Just because, as you said, once people have like a topic or a theme or something, then it's like, that's all you get. And so every Trotsky figurine, something has bird on it. Our plates have birds on it. Like, oh yeah, again, everything is birds.
I literally was having this conversation today. I work at a vet clinic part-time, and I was telling them that I was doing this today, and they were like, oh, Sam, that's so cool. Hey, I have a bird question. And I was like, cool. Like, yes, let's get into it. And it was about hummingbirds, and it was a super fun conversation. So, yep.
I have a couple of friends who, my husband's in the army, and so we've lived all over. And the last place we were stationed, I took them out. They're also military spouses, and we went birding together, and they're really beginner birders, but they really loved it. And so they go out, they're still both stationed in the same place, and they go out birding together. And in fact, just this weekend, they cut out a little cardboard like Freya and like drew me in and like labeled me and like took me with them. It was so nice. But they were, the text messages were like, well, what about this thing and that thing? And like, they're really getting into it. But it feels really wonderful to be able to encourage their journey, just as because I'm glad that they can like work together. Like, there's still two of them there as beginners together. But it really feels nice to me to be able to encourage them as they're going. And they saw like 5 different woodpecker species, and I did all of them, and they were really thrilled. And I like that makes me really, really happy to be part of their birding story.
This is making me think, so sorry, a little off the cuff here, but since the pandemic, do you feel like those people in your circle are getting more into birding and are now asking you because they are also noticing and like, because you're the bird person, want to ask you those questions as they are starting their birding journeys, like since the pandemic? Has that happened to you? Anyone, popcorn style?
I mentioned this breeding bird atlas that I manage. It started last year. We had 40,000 hours of effort put in just last year trying to, find breeding birds. I don't know how that compares to non-pandemic years, but it shocked me. I was not anticipating 40,000 hours of effort. This is in Maryland, so a pretty small area. So I think that at least for birders, there was definitely a lot of interest in, getting out and looking at stuff.
And they were volunteers, right? Those folks who were contributing. Yeah, 40,000 hours of
100%.
volunteer time.
Yeah.
There's sorry.
I was just gonna say that is really incredible. Go ahead.
I've seen quite a lot of data on the increase in birding in the last 12 months from things like new memberships at National Audubon and massive increases in downloads of the Cornell Labs Merlin Bird ID app, which is really, really a sweet little tool, especially for beginner birders. But yeah, just people staying home more and hearing. If you're sitting in your house, you can hear a lot more sound than if you're sitting in an office building or any kind of workspace where there's other people around making noise. And there's as well as having a bit more time, maybe because you don't have to commute. So then the day's still nice out and you can go for a walk and all that stuff. But yeah, it's really cool how many people have tuned back into nature. They may have been just as tuned in when they were kids, because kids tend to spend a bit more time outside. But it's really, really cool.
So between all of you, there are a lot of years of birding. And so my next question is sort of based on some reflection that I have been doing, because someone was like, well, Debbie, you've been birding for 10 years. And my response was like, oh, I'm not a birder. And I've heard other people in my office, like I work for an Audubon office, and there are other people in my office who I've also heard sort of like, oh, well, I'm not a birder, which has got me wondering, like we must have some image of what a birder is and what a birder does, that, maybe self-consciously we're all trying to distance ourselves from. So my question for each of you, and we'll start with Freya this time, is have you had this experience? Could you tell us a little bit about that? And then what does it mean to be a birder?
I have many opinions on this. Well, actually, no, I have one opinion on it and it's very strong. So growing up in Australia, we always talked about bird watching and being bird watchers, and being a birder was like an American term, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we're Australians. So like, cool. And so I remember I was like, Mom, I think I'm turning into a birder. And she's like, well, you're still Australian, so I think it's a bird watcher. I'm like, okay. Like, the funny like cultural language shift that happens when you live in a different place. But I think it's a really cool thing to use birder instead of birdwatcher, because not everyone watches birds, and a lot of birders who are blind or have low vision don't necessarily see birds at all or very well, but they are certainly out there enjoying birds. And even sighted birders, even if people don't think they're very good at birding by ear, a lot of birders will to some extent rely on audio cues to be like, oh, I hear a thing, let me look for it. My definition of birding is the act of enjoying wild birds. And that does not require you to see them or to hear them. It does probably one or the other, but not both necessarily. It does not require you to own a pair of optics or know how to use them. It does not require you to be able to identify them. You don't have to be walking. You don't have to be in a group. You can bird from your computer, like watching a webcam or something. There's so many different ways to go birding, and none of them are wrong. And if as a whole community we start talking about birding like that, with that huge umbrella like the act of enjoying wild birds. It means that we're being more inclusive of birders with different disabilities and other health concerns, but it also means, from exactly what you were saying, Debbie, it means that if anyone who enjoys wild birds can describe themselves as a birder, there isn't that weird kind of feeling where people are like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm qualified to be a birder. Like, I've only been out 17 times. Like, at what point, how many times do you have to be out looking for birds to be able to like graduate into being a birder? Like, that's bizarre. Like, there isn't a qualification. At some point, people along their journey go, oh, I guess that's what I am. But why do people have to feel like there's some level to reach first? Like, that's, if birding is the act of enjoying wild birds, then everyone who does that is a birder. And that's just inherently so much more inclusive of beginner birders too. And that's my definition. That's my mission. I'm on a mission about that because that's such an easy way to be more inclusive and make this really awesome hobby and potentially career more accessible and inclusive for everyone.
Thank you. Sam, would you like to go next?
I think that, like, again, because I've only been doing this for 3 years, I think that, like, and then since starting the podcast, I've been like kind of launched into this idea and kind of what people think it means to like be a birder. And a lot of it is associated with wealth, having the funds to have gear, to even have binoculars or a scope or the ability to just like go anywhere to bird. And that being a birder means that you go to these wildlife refuges or you chase rare birds or I think a big like factor in what I think people think it means to be a birder or to be a good birder is the idea of seeing good birds, which can be rare and then also international. So having the ability to fly somewhere, international birding, and that, like, that's such a small portion of people in general it's not inclusive to the amount of people that actually enjoy finding birds, and so that was the thing that bothered me almost immediately, was this kind of hierarchical weird power dynamic between even just like local like birding trips or bird walks or bird events that happen where there's a person that is there, they are the guide, they know everything, and then there's everybody else. And that if you aren't that person, then you can't consider yourself a birder yet. Like you have to be in some sort of position of power in order to, or have met some level of knowledge in order to consider yourself that. And it's really exclusionary to a lot of things. Also, like, again, back to the idea of like leaving to go to travel to go somewhere, even if that's like 30 minutes down the road to a refuge or to a green space at all. A lot of places don't have green spaces. There's a lot of urban areas that don't have that, but there are birds everywhere. And then the idea that's coupled with what a good bird is. So to tell somebody that they can't leave or they have to go to a green space in order to see good birds, and that the birds that are accessible to them, like crows or pigeons, are boring or bad birds or like not interesting. The crows in your neighborhood, I don't care where you live, they're gonna be interesting. They're fun and they're just so smart, and that there's like never a lack for a dull moment if you actually like are paying attention. And so this has been a ongoing kind of like like Freya, like redefining in different ways, which I love. We're all doing it in different ways, of what that actually looks like for people. And that question comes up so much. People are always like, well, I don't really consider myself a birder. And I'm like, I mean, do you like them? And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, well, there you go. So that's literally all you need. So yeah.
Can I just jump in and piggyback off Sam and her comment about good birds? Yeah, I'm really this idea too. And a lot of times I've been out on trails and someone will say, oh, have you seen any good birds today? Just as they're walking past, as a means of striking up a conversation. And it's actually really funny because we've moved, I'm now living in my 4th state in the US in 5 years of living in the US. Texas, Massachusetts, Kentucky, and Alabama, they're very different birds you find in those 4 places. And so whatever a good bird is considered in one place, like a painted bunting in Tuscaloosa would be really exciting. Well, actually, there's a few of them around, I believe, in summer, but I haven't been a summer here. Okay, a painted bunting in Massachusetts would be really exciting. But in Central Texas, like that's just summer. So, so like what, if you ask me, have I seen any good birds? Until I figured it out, and we haven't lived anywhere long enough to really figure out what exactly would be considered rare in this location, I don't really know what answer you are looking from me, because there's some birds that I've seen today that I was excited about, but maybe for you, they're just your everyday birds because you live around here. So the same idea that Sam's talking about, like that some birds somehow are worth more than other birds, I think it's not. I'm not. It's exclusive in the fact that, say, a beginner birder, like if they are asked that question on the trail and they're like, yeah, I just saw a chipping sparrow, and the more experienced birder might be like, oh, a chipping sparrow, like there's 20 of them in my backyard every day, like that's not exciting. I mean, how does that feel as the beginner who's like, oh, but I've never seen one before, and I was really proud because sparrows are tricky to ID, and I ID'd it positively, and that was really exciting for me, and now I just feel terrible. Like that's horrible. So the good bird thing for me, I think those questions are usually meant to be, have you seen any unexpected birds today? Or have you seen any rare birds today? But being lazy in our English language choices, it's, have you seen any good birds today? But it would be really easy for us all to switch that out and just be more inclusive like that. Sorry, Jordan and Gabriel, I just wanted to run with that good bird idea.
I'm going to let Jordan and Gabriel speak too, for sure, but I just wanted to shout out to the chat. There's a few people who are saying you go out and you're like, oh, I saw these birds, and people are like, oh, okay, well, why would you bring someone's joy down in that way? Jordan and Gabriel, please.
So I was brought up, and I don't want to say raised, because I don't think it was my parents, but because I've been birding my whole life, I feel like I just really had this sense of birding is competitive, but in a cool way, right? It's this fun thing, right? I think it's actually judgment when we want to be honest, because I don't have a life list. I mean, I do, and that's over there. But if you ask me what my life list is, I could not tell you. And I am totally okay with that. And I would like to move on from that question. I just don't get the listing aspect. I think that is a lot. It's fun to keep lists because it's fun to talk about oh, I did see this bird, or oh, I really want to see that bird. But in a very traditional birding sense, a stereotypical way, I guess I would say, listing is just this bad competition because you're constantly comparing yourself. You're constantly ranking other people or ranking yourself, which isn't inclusive. I was a young birder. I was single digit age teenager, which was super not cool at the time, as a birder. And when I was younger, I was usually the only girl. And so even those hurdles have been there in terms of are you a birder? Do you have enough experience? What have you gained to, again, go from Birdwatcher, which was kind of this general, anyone, even if you just had a backyard feeder and it was a gift, you were a birdwatcher, but birder was the spectrum of seriousness and intensity. And I don't know, I just think that if everyone is caring about nature, whether that's the joy or so far as active conservation efforts, that's all that should matter. And so it's just been really interesting. I do identify as a birder, but it's definitely been a journey. And I very much recognize that like these are labels as well. And so I think there's just so much to reconcile between like your identity and what others put on you. And then again, that community aspect as well.
I will say Jordan's being a little bit modest here when she says that she was Young Birder. She was the ABA Young Birder of the Year. So like when people would ask her, you know, are you really a birder? It's like, yeah, she is. She's pretty legit.
That's embarrassing.
My perspective on this is maybe it sounds like it's a little bit different because I really enjoy the aspect of listing. I find making a list of birds to be really exciting, and it gives me like a goal to look forward to, and like I just enjoy it. There's a lot more to birds than just, you know, that tick on the list. But listing as part of birding, it's something that I enjoy. And I enjoy it so much that I kind of dragged Jordan into it. She's not a lister. I really enjoy eBird. I found all of her like childhood, youth notebooks with all of her bird lists, and I entered every checklist into eBird for her so that I can now compare our lists. And I have a lot of catching up to do with her. But that's just one way that I enjoy birds. And I have to agree with the kind of general sentiment here in that the aspect of listing and birding can be really detrimental. It comes off, as much as I enjoy listing, I despise the question of, you know, what's your life list or what's your state list or your ABA list? It doesn't matter. And, you know, if it brings you joy, or maybe if you're in like a fun competition with other people for the year or something, that's cool. But beyond that, like, it really doesn't matter. If you're asking someone what their life list is as you're out like chasing some vagrant, then that's just like a way of comparing to see like who's better than who. And that's not good for including people and welcoming people into your community. I also have to, I've mentioned this a fair bit, but I have to say that atlasing is like, man, it's awesome. And it's kind of the antithesis of birding unexpectedly, because birding is all about going out and finding all these species. And when you're atlasing, you're just out there appreciating the bird that you're looking at and really trying to observe its behavior. So that has kind of been something that I've really gotten into is just this aspect of just appreciating birds for what they're doing.
I feel like my bird list behind me is like being called out, but there's a birder here in Vermont called the Bird Diva, and she was giving a presentation, and she gives classes on slow birding, and she had her backyard bird list up and was talking about how her whole family, it has become this thing where it's just birds like in their yard. Like if you are across the street, it doesn't count. Like it's like while you're in your yard. And so I loved that she was sort of turning the list on itself and like really using it to, you know, acknowledge the birds and the visitors that she had coming just to her place, right? Like where she was. I am teasing you a little bit. Sam, there's a question that came up in the chat that I would love for you to speak to if you don't mind.
Oh, I don't mind at all. I kind of thought this was maybe gonna come up. Anyway, I think that like some of the questions around, again, birding as a thing, listing and e-birding and the competitive nature of it, along with the good bird, everything that we've been talking about. I think it's important to note that like there is a deeper conversation that isn't being had at all around why these things exist at all the way they do. the idea of a bird being better than another one, and those birds that are considered not good birds are usually going to be birds that are labeled invasive non-native, which that language should be troubling to anybody who's using it because it's xenophobic and it's racist. Those words are the same words that we put on to Black and brown human beings when they come here into America. And so that language being put onto birds is troubling. I mean, it's troubling. We shouldn't be using it really at all. And I talk about this in my latest episode, which is what I think it was Gwendolyn brought up here and posted over there. And I kind of get into also the language around the way in which we talk about birds. So the European starling is one of them that I think what gets people excited about birds are these birds that are going to be found more in higher numbers and are common but aren't at the same time, because they're wonderful, beautiful birds. And so what happens is there's this weird online thing where a new person will come out and they're like, oh, I found what is this bird? I don't know. Or I saw my first European starling. And it's usually white men that come in and immediately tell them that they need to murder these animals, and then put them down because they are excited about it at all. And I think that when you take the competitiveness of birding at any level, whether it is to compare, whether it is a competitiveness with yourself, all of that is fine. I'm not knocking the way that people bird. I also like to list, but I refuse to use eBird for several reasons. I think when we take a second and we step back and we look at how a lot of these structures are set up within birding and how they are similar structures and pillars to xenophobia and racism in America, it becomes a different story. And so the conversation that we can have about what it means to be a birder or what a good bird is a great conversation to have, but only if we're having it at a deep enough level to understand why it's problematic, truly, and why people feel left out of out of something that should be able to bring everybody joy no matter what, because it brings us joy. But what are the true, real reasons, the pillars, the foundations to why people aren't, especially BIPOC, especially Black people, are not birding? And a lot of what we're bringing up is why. So.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Gwen, for the question. Just keep shouting out the chat. If you've got things that you'd like to bring up and ask, please use the chat. And I think that's a nice segue to get to talk about the work that you all are doing a little bit more too, because you are each working to shine a light on the problems in the birding world, and that people are, there are all kinds of folks that are birding, and the erasure is real about who is birding, right? We're out here. And two, to then make birding better. So would you each mind, I'll start with Jordan and Gabriel, talk a little bit about the change that you are seeking to make and to see?
Let me give some backstory too of how we got here, especially since we're so new as a entity. I put it in quotes because we're not a nonprofit or anything like that. But the spring events of 2020 were really it's incredibly unfortunate for a lack of better word, but especially the event with Christian Cooper in New York City really brought especially the racial issues that have been going on for years and years. There's no denying that, but it brought it much closer and visible to the birding community than before. Again, I'm not justifying that, it's wrong, but that is what happened. And so along with a lot of other current events, Gabriel and I, we were acknowledging that we are privileged cis hetero white people that have a lot of learning and growth to do, but there's also this aspect that we wanted to do something, and especially being such long-term people that identify and consider the bird community our own, we wanted to put in the work at home and figure out how we could do something. And one of those things is realizing that this issue of eponymous names, again, human names put on birds, is something that has been overlooked for decades. I never got a history lesson from a bird or a human on what these names meant, who they were in honor of, how it came to be. It just was this accepted thing. And I am embarrassed to say that now, but it's the truth. And so we realized as we started learning more about some of the histories of these people that are being honored, that they're really bad, which is, again, not surprising, but why do we want to keep honoring those people? They're verbal statues, basically. And so we thought we would try to speak up. We would try to do our part and see if we could cause change to get these names removed. And so we tried to do that in a reaching out to leadership, reaching out to the people that actually are in charge of naming birds. And the word got out that we were doing this, and it grew into a public thing. And so now we consider ourselves an initiative, and that's why we have the website and our social media accounts, because we see this as a very grassroots, community-oriented thing. Gabriel and I are trying to help elevate the issue and put in the work around the issue, but we definitely know that how we came to have these names is very white-centered. And we are trying to say that it's not just the window dressing of getting these names removed. It is about the actual system, because the system is not, I saw this earlier. So I'm not taking credit for this. I saw it online, but it's not the system that is broken. The system was built this way. And so that is what we are trying to say. We need to rebuild. We need a system that has birds, names for birds, because birds are incredible and they deserve to have descriptive names that celebrate birds, but also think about the accessibility and inclusion aspect of these names, right? Because when you say Cooper's hawk, you get very little from that. You don't even get the type of hawk it is, right? Because there's different families of groups compared to, say, a blue jay, right? But then again, we go back to the system part, and to date, even, there are only white people on the group that are making decisions about bird names. Why are there not BIPOC birders, whether they are academic, scientific, birding as a hobby? Why are there not young birders? Why are there not people from other countries, right? Birds don't observe political boundaries. So why should only Americans be making the names, decisions on names? So for us, it really is, we want the names removed. There are 149 eponymous names for birds between Canada and Panama. It is a global issue. There are birds even in Australia that have these names as well. But we're trying to focus on North American birds because that's where we are. The initiative is global, but for our most direct work. And again, it really is, we just want everyone, there is no table to say that we need to make room at the table for people, because we don't want there to be a table. We just want to be out in the field with the birds. And so that's really where we're coming from in terms of, this is just the tip of the iceberg, both in terms of eponymous names. There are other very concerning names, whether it's for derogatory terms or connotations. Some examples include Eskimo curlew, Inca dove, bald eagle, even, because the assumption, many people assume that to be bald means that you have white skin. And so we're just starting with eponymous names because they all have the same, it's a concrete group of names to understand and talk about. And we hope that this then leads to conversations for the other names. But we also know that this is just the tip of the iceberg for the entire birding community. We know that this won't end racism or fix all of the issues in the bird community, but it's been fascinating that there has been so much resistance just in talking about bird names that it's highlighted how much work we truly need to do. Again, I know there are many people that know that there's a lot of work to do, but I think this has really been, a really fascinating journey for folks, and showing how the tendrils of colonialism and racism reaching into even bird names, which it seems niche, is just how far we have to go still. I also just want to share that coincidentally, we didn't know this at all, but this is also not a unique issue. A very parallel story is happening right now with rock climbing routes. There's a small group of people trying to get rock climbing routes renamed. And then even in a larger capacity, Deb Holland, when she was representing New Mexico, she had introduced legislation to get cities renamed. So I very much see us realizing and finally recognizing and owning the fact that words matter, not just labels or descriptive terms, but all words, even to the point of these eponymous bird names. So I don't know if you have anything to add, but.
Thank you, Jordan. And you just said two things that I want to point out, and then we'll go Freya and Sam, and you all can please respond to one another. But we hear systemic, right? Like all of these systemic problems, and we hear that word, and I think maybe that's one word that we hear so often that we're like, okay, yeah, I know what it means. But it's not that bird names is niche. It's that those tendrils are just so deep and so embedded in every single thing. The other thing that you spoke to, though, is that when we reconsider what we're naming, specifically for birds, that brings other people in. Like, I love that example. A Cooper's hawk, that actually means nothing, right? Like, people call our office all the time and they're like, I saw this hawk, and I have them to describe it. And it's like the word Cooper's hawk, that literally gives me that I can never remember, right? Like how to tell that one apart from the sharp-shinned. So this idea that we could just be more inclusive and help each other out if we just reconsidered those names.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't want to take up too much time, but just in terms of that, I felt like I was rambling at the end there, but I don't mean to take up too much time because I didn't even get to all the wonderful possibilities that this new process could have, right? So if you truly created a process where the entire community, all stakeholders got to contribute to what the new names are, inclusion right there. But also, like, we're all at the same starting line then, right? So here we are talking about what's a birder, different years of experience and everything. Well, someone that's 90 years old and birding their whole life is going to be at the same place as someone that's just looking at birds for the first day, because we all have to learn the new name, right? And then when you start doing that, which is, I think, pretty inclusive, then you can all of a sudden get really jazzed because you can be like, and I'm just going to go with the Cooper's hawk experience. Like, oh my gosh, did you know that I don't even know what an alternative name is, but you could be like, they have all of these cool facts. Or, if we're talking about a bird like Bachman sparrow, which is named after a minister who preached white supremacy and explained that it was in the Bible, so it was okay, which is not okay. But if that bird got renamed and we could be like, oh my gosh, this bird, it's super cool and it needs a lot of conservation. So like you just learned about this bird. So like, let's go and support either groups or go see it, or like, there's so much that you could do both for the people and for the bird part moving forward if we rename these birds. Like, it doesn't just have to be this like, oh, I have to learn new names and like, I don't want to aspect, you know, having that like, learning a new language hurdle, it could truly be this really powerful, wonderful moment for the entire community. So.
Thanks, Jordan. Freya, what change are you seeking to see or to make in birding?
That birding is truly for everybody and every kind of body. Birding has the potential to be completely inclusive and accessible to anybody with any kind of accessibility challenge as a result of a disability or other health concern. And in some places and in some communities it is, but there's a lot of work to do. So things like the physical accessibility, like, you know, whether there's steps on a bird trail or whether the bird blind has a window low enough that someone seated in a wheelchair could actually see out of the bird blind, whether there are enough benches along a trail so someone with chronic pain or chronic fatigue or a dodgy knee, I have a dodgy knee that impacts my ability to go birding, having a bench is really great because I can give it a rest. It's wonderful. You may also enjoy some slow birding while you're having a sit, like the Bird Diva. There's a physical accessibility, even stuff like bird clubs. A lot of bird clubs might have their, if it wasn't COVID, have their, you know, monthly meeting in a local community hall. Is that an accessible location? Okay, so it is, but the accessible entrance is around the back, but no one turned the lights on and it's at night. So like, and they didn't unlock the door. So someone turns up for the first time in a wheelchair, like that's the most unwelcoming thing, like a literal locked door. Like that's not great, you know. So the physical accessibility of that location is important, but so is the attitude of other birders who are able-bodied, sighted, hearing, neurotypical, who need to be intentionally inclusive and welcoming, like having the light on and the door unlocked, and that not being a second thought, but that just being when you open the door in the church hall or wherever, you know, you turn on all of the lights all at once, and you just always do, even though no one in a wheelchair has ever shown up. You never know, just have it ready. Like that shouldn't be a second thought, that should just be built in. So the social environment, everything you do takes place in a social and in a cultural environment, and those two environments can disable you from participating just as much as a physical environment, and that's where racism comes in as well. And so, yeah, a lot of our work is about addressing the physical environment of birding locations, and it's actually amazing. So that, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's not even the thing. It's the Architectural Barriers Act. There are certain things that are included in that legislation, but that legislation only applies to new or modified federal buildings. So the random state park or like the local nature center, like there's no obligation to comply with those standards. A lot of them do, but the trails aren't completely, all the bits that can make up a really truly accessible trail, they're not all addressed in there, and they're also the bare minimum, that legislation. So there's a whole lot more work to be done, and it's amazing how many trails that I've been to that they say, oh, this is an accessible trail, and you go, and when you know what you're looking for, yeah, maybe not really, because there's so many components, and it's because accessibility and inclusion hasn't been at the forefront of those trail designers or the new manager or whoever who might be able to update that location. It's just not there, or it's been like half done, but not really. So there's a lot of work in that. Educating people what needs to be done, but also advocating for change. And a lot of times people are really excited when you're like, hey, this place is amazing. Like this little thing, like it'd be so great if you could just pave the grass in a trail, like in a section from the parking lot to the trail, so that someone could actually get onto the trail. There's a bike path like half a mile from my house that is this example. You could actually get from the parking lot to the trail with any kind of mobility challenge, whether you're a wheelchair user or you're using crutches or you have a dodgy knee or whatever thing, on the paved surface. The trail's great. I can't get there. So, but yeah, in the social and cultural environment, there's lots of education there about how to be inclusive, how to be intentionally inclusive, and how to be the disability etiquette stuff. And the really cool thing about that makes me really excited is that teaching folks in the birding community, like, never push someone in a wheelchair without their consent. Do not do that thing. Never. Do not do that thing. Or like, what's another example? Leaning. I know Virginia has shared this story, the Birdability founder, of people like they're birding together and someone's kneeling down next to her on the trail looking at a bird, and then they like push on her wheelchair to stand up. That's not cool. That is not cool. And she says she doesn't really mind when friends do it, but like if someone like grabbed onto my hip to help them stand up, like, that's weird. And in a wheelchair, that's also like kind of a safety concern. So, you know, talking to people about that sort of stuff extends past the birding community. And so the next time you're at the supermarket and there's someone in a wheelchair, you also know not to just randomly push them, whether you think they need help or not. You know, so that's kind of awesome. But the birders with disabilities aren't all white and straight. And so BIPOC birders and LGBTQIA+ birders and birders who've come from other countries and all kinds of other groups of people, if we don't address racism and homophobia and xenophobia, diversity and inclusion is the whole thing. It's not just like a bit of the thing. It's like, you can't just operate in a silo, because there are birders who are Black and also gay, like, and have disabilities, you know, so you got to kind of do it all. But the really awesome thing is that when you are intentionally inclusive, and when you do go out of your way to design for every kind of body and to be intentionally inclusive, you get all the different kinds of people. And diversity is what makes birds interesting. If every single bird was a painted bunting, probably wouldn't be that exciting after all, you know. So like that's the beauty, and it's there's a lot of work to do, but there's a lot of people who are really on board with it, and that's really exciting. And a lot of folks have said to us, like, thank you for doing what you're doing, because I wanted to be inclusive, but I didn't know how. So thank you for explaining how. And that's really encouraging. Like, it's not like I'm bashing into a brick wall. Like, people want to know, we just got to teach them. So and then our third kind of thing, the physical environment, the social and cultural environment, and then the big thing we're going to be doing then is reaching out to people who have disabilities and other health concerns who aren't birders yet, and introducing them to birding, so they can also get the joys of birding if they want, because perhaps like some potential birders who are BIPOC, a lot of people with disabilities may never have seen themselves represented in the birding community and may not realize that they could participate. They may have thought all birders had to walk on trails to be birders, and so like, that's not a thing I can do. But you can bird from the blind, as long as the blind's accessible, you know, or you can bird by ear sitting down at that sit spot while you're doing some slow birding, even though you're totally blind. So that's really exciting too, the sharing the joy really, really widely. Like, we're really excited about that.
Thank you, Freya. Sam, same question, please. What change are you seeking to see and to help make in the world of birding?
Yeah, so I think like this question for me is kind of constantly shifting. My intentions when I first started the podcast were to basically be accessible for people of color, especially like youth, and make it, or people who don't know that they love birds or have just started out. And be more educational. And then like, I was like going to talk about racism because that was my personal experience. And now it's turned into this kind of, now that I'm like in it, like in the birding community, which I wasn't in it until I got on Instagram essentially and started this podcast, and I see like what's up essentially. My whole thing has shifted into like I'm ready to rip the tendrils out essentially. I have conversations about race and racism and my identity and what I deal with and what my community deals with, both in birding and out of birding, every day of my life. And it is one of those things where I just like don't want to see it in birding anymore, because I experience so much joy in it. And so I guess my mission, again, nothing is ever solid. Nothing is ever just going to be like cemented into one place. We should always constantly be learning to change. And so I guess like right now at this moment, my whole thing is to have the conversation and bring up the things that people are not talking about. And I think that's pretty apparent with my last episode, where I do talk about the double-crested cormorant and the European starling and the language used around those two and the literal physical harm that happens to those two birds for what reason. And then the nickname for the double-crested cormorant, which I'm just not even going to get into it because that'll make me mad. And so just like it's just that like the tendrils, like you were saying, Debbie, are just so entangled into just every facet of way of being in America, because of our history, and it just doesn't have a place for birding. But the issue is that if you don't understand how it happens in your everyday life outside of birding or what it looks like, then you're not going to understand what it looks like in something that does bring you joy. And so it's incredibly difficult to have that conversation. And so I don't really sugarcoat for that reason, essentially. And I think too, like the other thing that I kind of want to say after listening to everybody else is that like, I do believe that the birding community actually has the potential to be so welcoming and set an example for everybody else in this country. You know what I mean? It be it from birding to like Fortune 500 companies, like get it together, you know? And so I think when there's so many different people doing different things to make this birding community better, then we all learn from each other. Like I've learned things from Freya that I am working on, you know what I mean? Because nobody's a monolith and everybody has some sort of privilege somewhere. Everybody does. But there are those people who their identities intersect and compact where they actually don't have that much, you know, like it's really much more difficult. So I feel like I just digress, but I guess, yeah, my mission is just to rip out those tendrils within the birding community and just kind of like get people to kind of wake up a little bit to what structures have been implemented and for so long, and just like to walk away. My only thing is to walk away from my podcast or a conversation with me, be it in this format or in private, just like being like, man, I literally don't have to look at birding the way that I have been. Nobody is forcing us to do the things that we're doing. Nobody is making us like look through the like our glasses or our binoculars or just whatever, or just move through the world the way that we are. Nobody's making you do that. So you literally can change it. So that's my whole mission.
Can I jump in again?
Sure.
I had one thing to say halfway through that I thought, to ask a little question, but also that thing about changing it. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is a choice that anyone can make. Like you yourself, like there's no formalized definition of birding. Like there's not a governing body that says what birding is or isn't versus bird watching or whatever. So like you yourself can start describing yourself as a birder instead of a bird watcher and start talking about birding rather than bird watching. If you would like, you can choose to do that or not. And of course, like even if you want to do that, you'll probably slip up every now and then because your brain has always said birdwatcher. But I, as an Australian, there are a lot of words that I have to use in the US to be understood really clearly. And when I say trunk, no one knows that I'm talking about the thing at the back end of a car that you put your suitcase in. People think I'm talking about an elephant, like, but in Australia, that's called a trunk. So like I had to learn to call that thing, that's called a boot. Sorry, I gave that really bad example. We call it a boot. The thing at the back of a car, we call a boot. You all think I'm talking about shoes. Sorry, I did that the wrong way around. Beautiful, I'm assimilating. This is terrifying. Bring back the Australian language in my life. But my point is that maybe that was the perfect example of doing a word swap is not that hard, actually. It's a pretty like easy little, and this slides into bird names for birds. It's a pretty easy little thing once you've done it once or twice and just got used to the new idea that we're now going to call that bird a Canada jay and not a grey jay, for example. It's not that big a deal, but little things like that can make a real difference. But you have to be intentional about it. And being intentionally inclusive takes time and it takes effort, and sometimes it takes money. But if you just assume that everyone is included, and like, of course they're included, like, of course anyone can come, that's not good enough and it's not going to work. And you have to go out of your way to make sure people do feel welcome and do feel included. The other thing I was going to talk about really quick off Sam's discussion was about you have to do it outside of birding to bring into birding as well. And it's been really interesting seeing and hearing folks, white, able-bodied, probably straight folks saying like online and stuff, oh, like that, let's keep the politics out of birding. I'm just here for the birds. But you're a human being. So are these other birders. Like, it's not political, it's about humans, and it's very privileged and it's very ignorant to think that you can engage in any kind of activity that doesn't have that just like do that thing and not like see the bigger picture. And you're part of the bigger picture whether you want to be or not. So like, do you want to come along and like be inclusive and awesome, or do you just want to like pretend like you can operate in a silo and not care about the other human beings that you're without meaning to perhaps part of the community with? The politics out of birding thing is I've seen less and less, but still a lot in the last 12 months, and it doesn't. That kind of comment doesn't sit right with me for all those reasons. So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. Yeah, and I really love this idea of like, let's just like change birding and let that be the like leading edge that leads to like these changes happening, and yeah, honoring the human that we all are that is participating in these activities. Our executive director likes to talk about the example a lot of when sidewalks went from all having hard curbs to having curb cuts, right? Something that like you probably don't even think about now, but like when you go to a crosswalk, there's a nice little ramp. Like that didn't take anything away from you. And in fact, everybody was like, oh, the people that walk to the grocery store and have the carts, that helped them. And moms with strollers, that helped them. Like birding could be the curb cuts, right? Like we could just help make being outside and enjoying wildlife and conservation and just existing like better. So I really, really love that.
And it never making things physically accessible like that and inclusive in a cultural way, never takes away. It's never a disadvantage to anybody. It only includes. It's only a good thing. It's never detrimental. So yeah, curb cuts for the win.
Okay, so a couple of questions came in the chat that I want to make sure that we have time to get to. Sam, someone was wondering if you could speak to eBird. You mentioned that you don't use eBird, and they were saying that they considered it, you know, a useful and important way for folks to actually be able to like contribute data, right? We're always told scientists use that actual data, but we would love to hear. They would love to hear your thoughts on how come you don't use it.
Yeah. So everything in life is like a yes and. So like yes, eBird does do that, and that's good and it's important. And if you want to use eBird, use eBird. I personally don't do it, not to like jip out on scientific research by any means. But because I don't feel like it is accessible. Not everybody has a smartphone for the app. Not everybody has a computer for the website. Not everybody cares about listing. I also think that when you do post on eBird, there's this, what happens, especially if it's a rare bird, is people flood that area and then ethical birding just goes out the wayside. And then there's too many people in one area that is affecting that it's just trying to like hang out, or mate or is passing through, and it's like either, anyway, that's a couple of reasons why I don't. I also have heard many stories of like the ways in which eBird maybe used to be. I don't know because I've never even touched it. But of posting, like they had to do a delay of where you were because people were being creepy and like showing up where people were, women, like men showing up where women were posting, and that's like a fundamental flaw to me, and I don't like jive with that. And I don't know, I keep bird lists on my phone and like that's it. And I participate in like community science that then also translates to helping with those conservation efforts in different ways. And so I just don't think that it's a necessary thing to do if you don't want to. That's it.
Thank you. We also have a question that is directly to Jordan and Gabriel, but I think both Freya and Sam could also chime into this one too. So the setup is they were in a conversation and someone said that, with pride, Blackburnian warblers are named after Anna Blackburn, who was an early 18th century naturalist at a time when the field of natural science is dominated by men. So the question is, can we address racism, sexism, xenophobia in the way in which birds are named by diversifying the people who we honor by naming birds after them?
You want to take that one?
Well, first, I just got to say, like, awesome that that person knew that Blackburnian warbler was named after this woman, because that's one of, I think, only 2 eponyms in North America that don't have an apostrophe S. So it's like really hidden back there. So that's cool, just from like a trivia perspective and the history of birding and ornithology and stuff. In terms of like, gosh, the way in which birds and pretty much everything else has been named in science. I mean, the idea of Western science as we know it is super European. It's very white. And that is where a lot of these problems, these tendrils of colonialism that we've been talking about, that's where it comes from. And that's the root of the issues that we have with how organisms as a whole have been named. I mean, obviously, when folks came over to North America from Europe, all of these birds already had names. They were known to people already. A lot of those names have been completely erased, gone forever, because the languages and the people that spoke them are extinct, and that's horrible. A lot of the languages and the people who do still exist, those names still aren't known. So that level of erasure is horrible. But there's a deeper idea here with science and just addressing the fact that even now, even as we start to see more diversity coming into science, both of ideas and of actual people, it's still really heavily dominated by men and by white people, just the same folks who've always dominated. And so that is really why you see a committee who's in charge of the nomenclature and the taxonomy of birds in North America, made up primarily of men and all of white people. And those are the people who make the decisions about how birds are related to each other, which, yes, that's very much based on scientific research and whatnot, and what birds are called. That is not based on scientific research, barely at all. That's pretty much just a matter of opinion in terms of the common name of the bird.
Yeah, so I just want to highlight a few things. One is we actually have an FAQ, a frequently asked questions page on our website. And this is one of the things that we kind of address because we're so we've been pretty adamant about a few things. One is we have not given actual proposed alternative names because we think that should come from the community. Like, so Bird Names for Birds, like the entity, hasn't said this is the solution, because the community needs to say that, right? Also, we're white. We should not be proposing the solution. I wanna promote all of the ideas. I want to explore solutions, but I don't have the answers. And if I did, that would be just wrong. The other thing is that it really has to be all or nothing. And I'm talking about like no more eponyms, all or nothing. Even if we chose someone, and I'm just going to go for a stereotypical example, but like Mother Teresa even should not have a bird named after her. And that is because we are really highlighting the system, the way that we got here, the process. And if we keep going with this as well, if we don't expand this group of people that get to make decisions about bird names and everything, then we're inherently racist anyway, because we're going to be ranking which bird names should get changed first and who they get changed to, and why are we putting our ethics and morals, even in these race or sex or anything else based groups, onto birds. Like, it's how Gabriel introduced himself. Like, we just love birds, and so birds should have these own names, not in an anthropomorphic sense, but truly in just a let's talk about the birds, and then we get to celebrate them, and we get to have the joy of observing or studying or anything else. And so that's where, again, we're trying to like put in the work to help move this forward to a better place, but we're not trying to say, we're trying to help us move forward without telling us how to do it, which is sometimes really challenging, because I think especially for the white bird people we've interacted with, they need more guidance and more like lay it out for me. But that's not, we have to know how we got here and why we got here, and the importance of just this change alone compared to that, again, like window dressing of the bird names themselves. So
I'm going to jump in, and I would say too that I think that it's important to note that a lot of like white scientists, when they came over, still had a colonizing mind, and that a lot of colonizing, that mindset of colonizing is claiming, and that I discovered this, therefore now it is mine, and that is that's just like really problematic, and it's a white supremacy thing as well. A lot of gatekeeping happens with that, and knowledge in birding as well, and outside of birding, of just like claiming. And I think that when you keep or add in names like that just reiterates that kind of colonizer white supremacy mindset of claiming as like, oh, well, this person found this, or it was named after them, therefore it is theirs, instead of something belonging to an entire community, or just like none of these birds are ours. None of these animals are ours. I see that a lot with like backyard birders and like bird feeders that like, oh, the starlings came and they scared away my whatever, fill in the blank, my good bird, whatever, sorry, I'm gonna swear, sorry. But and so I think that like it doesn't really, like, thinking about wanting to diversify who you name birds after doesn't solve the issue of that claiming mentality, and it doesn't really do justice to the animals that we care about belonging to themselves and their own situation in their own world and to nature. Like, this is not ours. That's a white supremacist settler colonizer mentality that is one of those tendrils that needs to be ripped out.
Can I also just jump in and thank you, Sam, for putting in the chat about George Perry. So that is, first of all, he's wonderful. We have had the privilege of actually like working with him on different things and talking to him, and he is wonderful, and he is a prime example of someone that we are hoping to amplify and boost, right? Like, we should be hearing from him for a variety of reasons, not Gabriel and I, who have probably talked all of your ears off already. I also just wanted to highlight, since Sam put, so George wrote a proposal, because anyone can write a proposal to request a bird, and this is actually good background anyway. So it's kind of a two-step process. So anyone can write a proposal and say, this bird, let's go with Cooper's hawk, should have its name changed. And you have to have a pretty researched, like, substantial proposal to say why. And then this committee will review it and say yes or no. Then you get to talk about what the new name should be, right? So what we're also saying, the committee gets to talk about what the new name should be. Bird Names for Birds is saying, let's take out that first step and just say, let's do it. Let's just skip ahead, right? And talk about what the new name should be. So that's one thing. But going back to George, so George wrote a proposal for a bird, a type of duck, and submitted it, and it was not accepted. I simply want to clarify, though, that this committee is not accepting any proposal. So it's not just George and his experience and his proposal that didn't get accepted. They actually said that they are not accepting any common bird name proposals this year, which is that's pretty big, to be so blunt about the acceptance of this change and where things are going. And I just wanted to highlight again, please, like, go follow George. He does great work. He's such a great guy. He has art of all of these birds that need new names. But I do just want to make sure, even if he's on here or listening or sees a recording, that he knows, like, he's not alone. So that's a big thing.
Okay, thank you. So we are just at the end, but I want to make sure that you all have the chance here to uplift your hard work. So we'll go Sam, Freya, Jordan, and Gabriel. How can our viewers support your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think like mine's pretty easy. Just listen to the podcast. Listens help me. Download, follow on Instagram, and I think, like, in terms of, like, that's how you can support me and like just me as a person and my goals with the podcast. But in terms of the larger conversation, just like, if you're new to it, as probably, as a white person, I will just say that, or even just like a person of color who isn't necessarily like from America, who hasn't really understand American racism. Anyway, if you're new to it, just try to remain open to the conversation and try to remain open to knowing that there are things to unlearn and things to relearn, and that's a normal. It is hard and it is normal and it is necessary. And I think that when you come with an open mind, ready to engage and ready to be curious about honestly anything that we all are talking about today, that is what is going to help me and my mission here to rip the specific racist tendrils out of birding, keep that conversation going and have that conversation in your everyday life. And if you don't know where to start, Google is your friend.
Thank you, Sam. Freya?
Our website is birdability.org. If you're interested in all the stuff that I've been talking about, check it out. There's lots and lots of information up there about accessibility of birding locations. You can contribute to the Birdability map, which is super cool, crowdsourced, so that anyone can do it. There's a checklist that's pretty straightforward. Just asks you what you find there. What's the surface of the trail? Really, you don't have to know anything. It leads you through it. You don't have to know stuff. And it means that folks with accessibility challenges can look up the map and see about these specific features that they need to know about ahead of time before they go out birding. So you can contribute to that. Sorry, I muted myself. You can follow us on social media at Birdability, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also donate because we're less than 3 months old as a nonprofit, so we're just getting going, and any donation, big or small, is really, really helpful and really appreciated. In fact, we just launched a campaign in our newsletter. Sign up to our newsletter. Do that. Today for our funders circle, inviting folks to be part of the beginning of this really awesome journey. And we're hoping to raise $50,000. So anything that you contribute will go towards that goal in the next 2.5 months. So that would be awesome. And yeah, be open. I really love that. If you don't know, try and learn. If you don't know what words to use, that's often a thing with folks interacting with people with disabilities. There's a thing on our website about inclusive language use. Just as a starting point, everyone gets to choose what they want to be called, and people have different preferences, but just as a starting point, because if you don't say hi to the birder in a wheelchair just because you don't know what to say to the birder in a wheelchair, both of you miss out. That's a shame. So just have a go. Ask people what they need. They're the experts in themselves. And if you want to hear Australian accents every now and then, my Instagram handle is @theotbirder. And I sometimes explain that we call them capsicums and not bell peppers when we planted our veggie patch here. But yeah, Birdability, @Birdability is really the place to go.
Thank you, Freya. Also, Vermonters on this call who are all probably out hiking today because it was the first warm day of the year. There's only 1 or 2 trails listed on the Birdability map, so you could just do that. Jordan and Gabriel, wrap us up, please. What are ways that our viewers can support your work?
Thanks. Yeah. So Sam and Freya said about be open, but be open and learn and grow and keep the conversation going, even if there's not an actual action item or something that you can concretely do. Just spreading the word is really helpful, and especially for us, our whole initiative is word-based, right? So even though there's a cost in terms of future field guide editions and everything, technically this should be free because it's just the words that we use. Obviously nothing is for free, there's always a cost, but really just learn. We have historical bios on our website, so if you really are curious, we work with 2 other wonderful people, Justin and Alex, who are doing all of this research and collation of history that hasn't really been done before. And so you can actually learn about the people that these birds are named after, and then tell a friend and say, maybe we should start brainstorming what alternative names are, either for ourselves or hopefully one day there will be a way for for us all to contribute our ideas for what, you know, a Wilson's warbler should be. Should it be like the toupee yellow warbler or black-capped warbler? Who knows? But again, our website is birdnamesforbirds.wordpress.com, and we're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at birdnames4birds. But really, again, it's just that be open, learn, get involved, tell a friend. This is such a community thing that I think it's overwhelming, good or bad, for everyone. And so just knowing that we're in this as a community, I think is really both important, but also just really valuable. So the way to support us is to do that. So, yes. And then, so in the chat, Freya mentioned that, so the AOS, which is the American Ornithological Society, the overall organization that oversees taxonomy and nomenclature, is having a free, public, no requirements about who you are, Congress about English common bird names, common English bird names. And so please RSVP if you really are either interested in just learning about this issue or actually want to speak up and be involved. That is a huge thing, again, for North American birds specifically, on how we can actually hopefully move forward as a community on this issue. So.
Thank you, everyone, so much for your time today, for your words, for your thoughts. I know that I'm feeling totally empowered, and thank you, attendees, for all of the great questions that you've posted in the chat. When we post this recording, we'll make sure that all of these links end up with this posting as well. So again, thank you to everyone here. We really appreciate your time and having you. Take care, everyone.